My rich wife picked up the gift I gave her and said, "Cheap, filthy trash." Then she threw it back at my face, right there at her own birthday party. Her parents just smirked. I didn't argue. I pulled my investment, took back the BMW, and said, "From now on, you're on your own." She thought I was joking until everything disappeared. They say power corrupts, but I've learned something more nuanced over the years. Visibility corrupts. The moment people know what you have, they start treating you differently. They calculate, they posture, they perform. But when they think you're nobody, that's when you see who they really are. My name is Daniel Morgan, and for 3 years I was invisible. Not literally, of course. I showed up to work every day at Convergence Technologies, a mid-sized software firm in Austin that specialized in enterprise resource planning solutions. I had an office, well, a cubicle really, on the third floor wedged between the break room and the bathrooms. The kind of location that told you everything you needed to know about your place in the hierarchy. I wrote code. I attended meetings where I rarely spoke. I ate lunch alone most days, usually at my desk, reading industry journals or reviewing market analyses that had nothing to do with my actual job responsibilities. To everyone at Convergence, I was just Daniel, the quiet guy in systems integration, competent enough not to get fired, unremarkable enough not to get promoted. I'd been there for 3 years, and I could count on one hand the number of times the C-suite executives had spoken directly to me. I was furniture, wallpaper, the kind of person whose name people had to check on the org chart. My wife Lauren worked there too. She was in marketing, a bright, ambitious woman with a natural charisma that made people gravitate toward her. We'd met at the company holiday party 4 years ago, back when I was still contracting for them, before I became a full-time employee. She'd been the one to approach me, actually, threading through the crowd with a glass of wine and a smile that seemed to suggest she'd been looking for an excuse to leave the conversation she'd been trapped in. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she'd said, and I'd laughed because it was true. That obvious? Only to someone who feels the same way. She'd extended her hand. Lauren Hartwell. The name had registered immediately, of course. Hartwell. As in Richard Hartwell, the CEO and founder of Convergence Technologies. But I'd taken her hand anyway, and we'd spent the rest of the evening talking about everything except work. She was funny, sharp, with this way of tilting her head when she listened that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We'd been married within a year. Richard Hartwell, my father-in-law, had not approved. He'd made that clear from the beginning, though he was too calculated to say it outright. Instead, he'd done what powerful men do. He'd smiled and shaken my hand and said all the right things, while his eyes performed a different calculation entirely. I could see it happening in real time. Who is this person? What does he want? How do I minimize the threat he represents to my daughter, my company, my carefully constructed world? The answer he'd arrived at, clearly, was that I was nobody, a low-level employee who'd gotten lucky. Someone who'd somehow convinced his daughter to settle, but who would eventually reveal himself to be exactly what Richard suspected: ordinary, uninspired, ultimately disposable. He wasn't entirely wrong about the disposable part, I suppose, just not in the way he thought. I'd learned to be invisible long before I met Lauren. It was a skill I'd cultivated deliberately, the way some people cultivate charisma or technical expertise. In my case, it was a survival mechanism that had evolved into a strategic advantage. When people don't see you, they don't guard themselves around you. They say things. They make assumptions. They reveal their true nature in ways they never would if they thought you mattered. My father had taught me this, though not intentionally. He'd been a day trader, the kind who worked from a home office and spent 16 hours a day staring at screens, watching patterns emerge in the chaos of financial markets. He'd never made a fortune, but he'd made enough to keep us comfortable. And more importantly, he'd taught me to see what others missed. Most people trade on emotion, he used to say, fear, greed, hope, but the market doesn't care about any of that. The market only cares about what's actually happening. Your job is to see the reality underneath the noise. He'd died of a heart attack when I was 23, sitting at his desk with 3 monitors glowing around him like a technological shrine. I'd found him there after his 3rd missed phone call, still in his chair, his face peaceful. The last trade he'd executed had been profitable. I'd inherited his accounts, his methodologies, and his fundamental philosophy. See what's really there, not what people want you to see. So I'd started watching Convergence Technologies, really watching the way my father had watched markets. I'd studied the quarterly reports, the investor calls, the partnership announcements. I'd analyzed the company's position in an evolving industry, its potential for growth, its vulnerabilities. And I'd seen what Richard Hartwell, for all his executive swagger, had apparently missed. Convergence was undervalued, significantly. The company had strong fundamentals, innovative products, and a market position that was far more robust than its stock price suggested. I'd started buying shares 6 years ago, back when I was still a contractor. Small purchases at first, nothing that would trigger attention. I'd used multiple accounts, different brokers, carefully structuring each acquisition to stay below reporting thresholds. Over time, as I'd learned more about the company's internals, I'd become more aggressive. When the stock dipped during the 22 tech downturn, I'd leveraged everything I had, including my inheritance, to buy more. By the time I became a full-time employee, by the time I met Lauren, I owned 31% of the company's shares. By now, 3 years later, that number was 83%. Nobody knew, not the board, not the SEC, because I'd structured everything through entities that didn't trigger beneficial ownership reporting until a certain threshold. Not my wife, because how do you explain to someone that you've been systematically acquiring control of her father's company? Not Richard Hartwell, who still saw me as the unremarkable nobody his daughter had inexplicably married. The irony wasn't lost on me. I went to work every day in a company I effectively owned, taking direction from people who wouldn't last 5 minutes if I decided to exercise my actual authority. I attended company meetings where Richard would pontificate about his vision for his company, and I'd nod along like everyone else, making notes I'd never reference, performing the role of engaged but unimportant employee. It was exhausting. It was necessary. And it was about to end. The signs had been building for months. Richard had been making moves, questionable moves, that suggested he either didn't understand the business as well as he thought, or didn't care about anything beyond his own enrichment. He'd pushed through an expensive acquisition of a competitor that was more liability than asset. He'd funneled company resources into a vanity project, a strategic innovation lab that was really just a playground for his ego. He'd started treating the company less like a business and more like a personal fiefdom. Worse, he'd started treating employees like subjects rather than stakeholders. The culture had shifted. People were afraid. The good ones were leaving. The company I'd invested in, the company I'd believed in, was being hollowed out from within by the very person who was supposed to be its steward. And then there was how he treated me. I could have endured the dismissiveness, the casual disrespect, the way he'd look through me rather than at me during the rare occasions we interacted. I'd chosen invisibility, after all. But lately it had gone beyond mere contempt. He'd started actively undermining me, blocking a promotion I'd been recommended for, reassigning my projects to other teams, making comments to Lauren about how perhaps I wasn't as committed to career growth as someone in this family should be. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago, at a family dinner. We'd been at Richard and Evelyn's house, a sprawling modernist mansion in the hills with views of the city and enough square footage to house a small village. Lauren's mother, Evelyn, had prepared one of her elaborate meals, 7 courses, each one a small work of art, each one an opportunity for Richard to hold court about whatever was on his mind. That evening it had been the company, again. "We're going to need to make some difficult decisions in the next quarter," Richard had announced, swirling his wine with the gravity of someone revealing state secrets. "The board is pushing for efficiency improvements, streamlining operations. You know how it is." I'd known exactly how it was. Efficiency improvements was executive speak for layoffs. Streamlining operations meant cutting people who actually did the work so the metrics would look better for shareholders who didn't know any better. "Who are you thinking of cutting?" Lauren had asked. She'd had enough wine to be direct, not quite enough to be worried about it. "Oh, we're still evaluating. But there are definitely some areas of redundancy. Some positions that, frankly, never should have been created in the first place." He'd looked at me then, just for a moment, but it had been enough. The message was clear. "Systems integration?" I'd asked quietly. Among others, we need people who are aligned with the vision, Daniel. People who understand what we're building. Not just, he'd waved his hand dismissively, maintenance workers. Maintenance workers. I'd written half the core architecture his company ran on. I'd fixed critical vulnerabilities that could have cost millions. I'd designed systems that had directly increased productivity by measurable percentages, but sure, maintenance workers. Dad, Lauren had interjected, her voice tight. That's not fair. I'm just being realistic, sweetheart. Business is business. Sometimes you have to make hard choices about who belongs in the boat and who doesn't. I'd stayed quiet. I'd cut my salmon into precise pieces and chewed each one thoroughly, counting to 10, then 20, and then 30. Lauren had tried to redirect the conversation. Evelyn had made some diplomatic comment about the importance of considering all factors. Richard had moved on to his next topic, probably not even registering the grenade he just lobbed into the center of the table. But I'd registered it. And something had shifted that night, something fundamental and irreversible. I'd spent 3 years being invisible. I'd watched. I'd waited. I'd told myself I was being strategic, that there was value in patience, that the right moment would present itself. But the truth I'd finally admitted to myself over that salmon dinner in a house that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime, was that I wasn't being strategic. I was being a coward. I'd been hiding from confrontation, from difficult conversations, from the weight of what I'd done and what it meant. I'd told myself I was protecting Lauren, that she didn't need to know about my holdings because it would only complicate her relationship with her father. But really, I was protecting myself from being seen, from being known, from having to defend decisions I'd made in isolation. That ended now. I'd spent the last 3 weeks preparing, consulting with lawyers, meeting with board members I'd identified as potential allies, reviewing every document, every filing, every piece of leverage I might need. I'd done this work in stolen moments, early mornings before Lauren woke up, late nights after she'd gone to bed, lunch hours spent in coffee shops far from the office. And now, on this Thursday morning in November, sitting in my third-floor cubicle between the break room and the bathrooms, I was ready. I'd arrived early, as usual. The building was mostly empty, just the security guard at the front desk and a few other early risers scattered across the floors. I'd made coffee in the break room, checked my email, reviewed my notes one final time. Everything was in order. Everything was ready. I just had to wait for Richard to make his move. He was predictable, at least. Every Thursday at 9:30, he did a walkthrough of the office, a performance of accessibility where he'd glad hand a few people, ask about their projects with transparent disinterest, and generally remind everyone that he existed and they worked for him. It was theater, but it was consistent theater. I opened my laptop and started working on code. I didn't need to finish for a project I might not still be working on by the end of the day. The irony of this, sitting here maintaining systems for a company I effectively owned, had long since stopped being funny. Now it was just absurd. The kind of absurdity that could only exist in a world where paper documentation mattered more than practical reality. At 9:27, I heard his voice in the hallway. Absolutely crucial that we maintain forward momentum, he was saying to someone, probably Jamie from operations. The market doesn't care about excuses, they care about results. I kept typing, my fingers moving across the keyboard in a rhythm that was more meditation than productivity. My heart rate was elevated but controlled. I'd played this moment through in my mind dozens of times. I knew what was coming. I was ready for it. The voices grew closer. I could hear Richard's distinctive laugh, the kind that was more about asserting dominance than expressing actual humor. Then footsteps, multiple sets, approaching my cubicle. They stopped. I could feel them there, standing just behind me, watching, waiting for me to turn around. This was a power play, an old one. Make someone acknowledge you. Make them react. Establish the hierarchy through the simple mechanics of attention. I finished the line of code I was writing, saved the file. Then and only then I swiveled in my chair to face them. Richard stood there with Jamie and 2 other people I didn't immediately recognize. They looked uncomfortable, like soldiers who'd been conscripted into a war they didn't understand. Richard looked satisfied. That was the word. like a man who was about to solve a problem he'd been mulling over for too long. "Daniel," he said, and something in his tone, the false warmth layered over something colder, told me everything I needed to know. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." I stood up, matching his energy with perfect neutrality. "What can I do for you?" He glanced at the others, then back at me. This was another power play, the audience. Witnesses. People who would tell the story of what happened here, spreading it through the office like a virus. "I'm going to be direct because I respect you too much to waste your time," he began, and I had to admire the craft of it. The pretense of respect as a prelude to disrespect. The false intimacy of directness. "We've been doing a comprehensive review of our operations, and we've identified some areas where we need to make changes. Difficult changes." I nodded, waiting. "Your role specifically has been flagged as redundant. We're eliminating the position, effective immediately." The hallway was quiet. Somewhere on another floor, someone laughed. A phone rang, unanswered. "I see," I said. "This isn't personal, Daniel. It's business. The market is demanding efficiency, and we have to respond. You understand?" "I understand that you've decided to eliminate my position," I said carefully. "Can I ask what specific redundancies you've identified?" His jaw tightened. He hadn't expected questions. People being fired don't usually ask for elaboration. They cry or argue or storm off. They don't request technical specifications for their own termination. "The board has made this decision," he said, pulling out his phone and glancing at it. Another power play, the message that I wasn't worth his full attention. "We don't need to litigate the details. Security will be here shortly to walk you out. I'd suggest you start gathering your personal items." "Security," I repeated. "Standard procedure for separation events. I'm sure you understand." I looked at the others. Jamie wouldn't meet my eyes. The two I didn't recognize were studying the floor like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Before they arrive," I said, "could we handle this properly? There are some things we should discuss." "There's nothing to discuss." Richard was still looking at his phone, scrolling through something. Emails, probably. Or maybe just the appearance of scrolling, the performance of being too busy to fully engage with the nobody he was firing. "Your role is eliminated. You'll receive 2 weeks severance as per your contract. HR will send you the paperwork." "Richard," I said, and something in my voice made him look up. Finally, actually look at me, not through me, for perhaps the first time in 3 years. "I think we should do this properly, in your office, with witnesses if you prefer, but properly." He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating. Was I going to make a scene? Threaten legal action? Start crying? What was this unremarkable nobody planning to do that would require his office? "Fine," he said finally. "If you want to drag this out, we can do it in my office. But the decision is final, Daniel. This isn't a negotiation." "I understand," I said. "Just give me 2 minutes to shut down my computer and grab some documents." He looked at his watch. A Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars. "2 minutes. Jamie, wait with him. Make sure he doesn't delete anything." They left, Richard striding away with the confidence of someone who just handled an unpleasant task efficiently. The two unknowns followed like remoras following a shark. Jamie stayed, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Sorry, man," he muttered. "This is fucked up." "It's fine," I said, and I meant it. I pulled up my email and sent a message to the company's general counsel with a subject line that read, "Urgent, beneficial ownership disclosure." Then I attached 3 documents I'd prepared weeks ago. Corporate filings, stock certificates, a legal memo that outlined in excruciating detail exactly who owned what percentage of Convergence Technologies. I hit send, then I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Lauren. "Call me when you can. Important. Not bad, I love you." 2 minutes had passed. "Ready?" Jamie asked. "Ready," I said. I followed him toward the elevator, carrying nothing but my phone and my wallet. I'd never had many personal items at my desk. No family photos, no novelty mugs, no toys or tchotchkes that marked territory. I'd been a ghost here, and ghosts travel light. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. Jamie kept stealing glances at me, probably trying to figure out if I was going to cry or rage or break down, but I felt calm. More calm than I'd felt in years, actually. Like something that had been wound too tight was finally unwinding. Richard's office occupied the southwest corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. It was all glass and steel and expensive furniture, the kind of space designed to intimidate. He was behind his desk when we entered, talking on his phone. He held up one finger. Wait, and continued his conversation. And another power play. Make them wait. Remind them who's in control. I sat down in one of the chairs facing his desk without waiting to be invited. Jamie hovered near the door, uncertain. Richard finished his call and set the phone down with deliberate care. All right, Daniel, what did you want to discuss? The terms of my separation, I said, and the future of the company. He actually laughed. The future of the company? Daniel, I appreciate your interest, but you're not in a position to... His phone buzzed. Then again, then a third time in quick succession. He picked it up, frowning, and I watched his expression change as he read whatever had just arrived. Confusion first, then concentration. Then something else entirely. Something that looked like the first whispers of panic. What? He looked up at me. What is this? That would be the beneficial ownership disclosure I just filed with the board and general counsel. The SEC filing will go through this afternoon. Beneficial ownership? He was still staring at his phone, scrolling now. This can't be right. This says you own 83% of the company's outstanding shares, I finished. Technically 83.4, but I rounded down for simplicity. I've been acquiring stock for 6 years, very carefully, very deliberately, all properly structured, all completely legal. Your lawyers can confirm this, though I imagine they're going to have some questions about why nobody caught it earlier. The silence that followed was extraordinary. You could hear the ventilation system, the distant hum of computers, someone's muffled voice from another floor. That's impossible, Richard said finally. So it's documented, every transaction, every acquisition. I can walk you through the timeline if you'd like, but I assume you'd prefer to verify with counsel first. He was standing now, though I hadn't seen him rise. His face had gone through several color changes, settling on something between white and gray. Ooh. He seemed to be having trouble forming words. You've been working here, in my company, while secretly buying up your company? I kept my voice gentle, almost sympathetic. Richard, with respect, it stopped being your company about 2 years ago. You currently own 11% of the outstanding shares. That makes you a minority shareholder. A significant one, certainly, but a minority shareholder nonetheless. This is fraud. This is corporate espionage. It's neither, and your lawyers will tell you the same thing. I'm an investor who chose to work at the company I invested in. There's no law against that. I didn't steal trade secrets or misrepresent my ownership. I simply didn't advertise it, which, again, isn't illegal. His phone was ringing now. He ignored it. You did this because of Lauren, he said. You wormed your way into my family, into my company. I started buying shares 2 years before I met your daughter, I interrupted. I married Lauren because I love her. Everything else is separate. She knows about this? Not yet. I'll tell her today. You manipulative... He caught himself, visibly trying to regain control. The board will never accept this. There are mechanisms. The board has no choice, I said quietly. I'm the majority shareholder. I have voting control. I can replace every board member if I choose to, including you. Including... The realization seemed to hit him physically. He sat down heavily. You're saying you can fire me. I'm saying I have that authority. Yes. Though I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. That's why I wanted to have this conversation properly, in your office, with some dignity, Jamie. Still standing by the door, made a sound that might have been a cough or might have been a strangled laugh. This is insane, Richard said. This is absolutely insane. You can't just... You've been nobody. You've been invisible. How did I afford it? I smiled, not unkindly. My father left me some money. Not a fortune, but enough to start with. I invested it well. I saw potential in convergence that the market had missed. I believed in what you'd built, actually. The fundamentals were sound. The vision was solid. The execution was... I paused, choosing my words carefully. The execution has been questionable lately. Questionable! The Meridian acquisition was a mistake. That innovation lab you funded is hemorrhaging money. You've let the company culture deteriorate. Good people are leaving. The ones who stay are afraid. You've been treating Convergence like a personal piggy bank rather than a business that has responsibilities to shareholders, of which I'm now the primary one. He was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. All this time you've been sitting in your cubicle, writing code, saying nothing, watching, I corrected, and learning, understanding how the company really works, not how the org chart says it works. You can learn a lot from being invisible, Richard. People are very honest when they don't think anyone important is listening. His phone rang again. This time he answered it. What? Then listening. Yes, I'm aware. He's sitting in my office right now. No, More listening. His face went from gray to red. That's not... I need to speak with the board immediately. Get everyone on a call. I don't care where they are or what they're doing now. He hung up without saying goodbye. That was Gerald, he said. Gerald was the company's general counsel. He's confirmed your holdings. He's also very interested in knowing why you chose now to reveal this. Because you were about to fire me, I said simply. And I thought that was probably a bad idea, given the circumstances. Also, I leaned forward slightly. I'm tired, Richard. I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of pretending to be less than I am. I'm tired of watching you make bad decisions for a company I care about. I'm tired of being treated like I'm lucky to be here, when the actual truth is that you're lucky I haven't intervened before now. Intervened? He said it like the word tasted bad. You think you can just waltz in here and... I didn't waltz in. I've been here for 3 years, quietly doing good work, watching you slowly undermine the foundation you built. I gave you chances, Richard. I waited. I hoped you'd course correct. But that dinner 3 weeks ago, when you called me a maintenance worker, I shook my head. That clarified things for me. So this is revenge. He said it like he'd figured something out. You're doing this to hurt me. No, I said, and I meant it. I'm doing this to protect the company and to protect myself. And maybe, if we can both be adults about this, to find a way forward that works for everyone. A way forward, he laughed, but there was no humor in it. You just threatened to replace the entire board. I said I have that authority. I didn't say I would use it. There's a difference. What do you want? Right now? I want you to cancel my termination. I want you to call an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. I want you to prepare to answer some very specific questions about your recent decisions. And I want you to understand something fundamental. Things are going to change. How much they change and how painful that change is depends largely on how you handle the next 72 hours. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at something past my shoulder. Out the window, probably. At the city that had seemed so firmly under his control just 20 minutes ago. Does Lauren know? He asked again, quieter this time. I told you, not yet. I'll tell her today. She's going to hate you for this. For going behind her back, for targeting her father. Maybe, I acknowledged. That's a risk I'm taking. But I didn't target you, Richard. I invested in a company I believed in. You made this personal by deciding I was expendable. I'm just making sure you understand that I'm not. His phone buzzed again. And again. The electronic sound of a world he thought he controlled demanding his attention. Asking questions he didn't have good answers for. The board meeting, he said finally. Monday morning, 9 a.m. Thank you. Don't thank me. This isn't over, Daniel. Not by a long shot. I didn't expect it to be. I stood up, straightened my jacket. For what it's worth, Richard, I really did believe in what you built. I still do. That's why I'm doing this. Not to destroy it. To save it from what you were turning it into. I walked on toward the door. Jamie stepped aside to let me pass. Daniel, Richard called after me. I turned. That message you sent Lauren, what did it say? I thought about lying, about obfuscating, but I was done with invisibility now. Done with hiding. I told her to call me when she could, and I told her it was important, but not bad. And I told her I loved her. Not bad, he repeated. You just blew up her father's company, and you told her it's not bad. I didn't blow up anything, I said quietly. I'm trying to fix it. There's a difference. Whether anyone can see that difference, I shrugged. I guess we'll find out. I left him there, in his corner office with his expensive furniture and his floor-to-ceiling views, staring at a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing with questions he couldn't answer. Jamie followed me to the elevator, silent. When the doors opened and I stepped inside, he finally spoke. That was the craziest thing I've ever seen. I pressed the button for the 3rd floor. You should probably not mention this to anyone until after the official announcement. Are you kidding? I'm not saying a word. I like my job. He hesitated. Am I going to still have my job? That's not up to me, but probably yes. You're good at what you do. The doors closed on his expression, relief mixed with residual shock. And I was alone in the elevator, descending back to the 3rd floor, back to my cubicle between the break room and the bathrooms. I had work to do, calls to make, documents to prepare for Monday's meeting, and a very difficult conversation with my wife to prepare for, one that would probably determine whether the rest of my life included the person I loved most in the world. But for right now, in this elevator, for these few seconds of solitude, I let myself feel it. The weight lifting, the mask coming off, the exhaustion of invisibility finally ending. The doors opened to the third floor. I stepped out visible at last and walked back to my desk to begin the next chapter of a story I'd been writing in secret for 6 years. The real work was just beginning. The hardest call I've ever had to make lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I know because I watched the timer on my phone screen the entire time, using it as an anchor while my world tilted on its axis. Lauren answered on the second ring. "Hey, I got your text. What's up? You never send mysterious messages." I was sitting in my car in the parking garage, where I'd retreated after the confrontation with Richard, and the concrete walls had a strange acoustic quality. Everything echoed in a way that made private conversations feel exposed, but it was still better than trying to have this conversation at my desk. "Can you take lunch early?" I asked. "I need to talk to you." There was a pause. In that silence, I could hear her calculating, the way you do when someone you love says they need to talk and their voice sounds like mine did right then. Controlled but fragile, like glass that's been stressed just short of shattering. "Daniel, you're scaring me. Are you okay? Is someone hurt?" "Everyone's fine, physically. But I need to tell you something, and I need to do it in person, and I need to do it now. Before—" I trailed off. "Before your father tells you his version. Before the gossip network gets hold of it. Before I lose my nerve. I can be there in 20 minutes. Where are you?" "Parking garage, level 3. I'll wait in the car." "Okay." Another pause. "Daniel, whatever it is, we'll figure it out. You know that, right?" "I hope so." I said. Ended the call before my voice could betray just how uncertain I was about that. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat there with the engine off, watching other cars come and go, people arriving late or leaving early, living normal days where the biggest revelation was probably what they'd have for dinner. I envied them with an intensity that was almost physical. My phone buzzed constantly. Emails from the general counsel's office, a terse message from the head of HR asking me to confirm my employment status. 3 separate texts from colleagues who'd somehow already heard something was happening. The office gossip network was apparently faster than I'd anticipated. I ignored all of it. At 11:47, Lauren's Tesla pulled into a spot 2 rows over. I watched her get out, scanning the garage, until she spotted my car. She was wearing what she called her serious marketing outfit: black blazer, white blouse, dark jeans. The kind of professional but approachable look that made clients trust her. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and even from this distance, I could see the worry creasing her forehead. I got out of my car and met her halfway between our vehicles, in the middle of a parking garage that smelled like exhaust and concrete dust. "Okay," she said, stopping in front of me. "You're freaking me out." "What's going on?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head a dozen different ways during the wait. I'd planned opening lines, anticipated questions, prepared explanations. All of that evaporated the moment I saw her face. "I own the company," I said. She stared at me. "What?" "Convergence. I own 83% of it. I've been buying shares for 6 years. Your father just tried to fire me this morning, and I had to tell him that I'm actually the majority shareholder, and he can't do that." The silence that followed was total. Somewhere above us, a car door slammed. A bird, how had a bird gotten into a parking garage? Made a sound that echoed off the concrete. "You!" Lauren shook her head like she was trying to physically dislodge the words I just said. "That's not funny, Daniel. It's not a joke. You own my father's company. Technically, it's a publicly traded company, but yes, the majority of it." "How? You don't have—" She was trying to do math in her head, I could see it. Calculating our joint finances, our salaries, trying to make numbers add up to something that made sense. "Where did you get millions of dollars?" "My father's inheritance, investment gains, careful planning over 6 years. Lauren, I know this sounds insane." "Insane?" Her voice pitched up. "Insane is, yes, this is insane. You're telling me that for our entire marriage, You've secretly owned the company where we both work? Where my father has worked for 20 years building something from nothing? Not our entire marriage. When we got married, I owned about 40, but yes, 40%. She said it like she was testing the words, seeing if they made more sense the second time. They didn't. And you never thought to mention this? Not once in 3 years? I wanted to, so many times, but what? You thought I'd, what, not understand? Not support you? Tell my father? Her eyes widened. Oh my God, you thought I'd tell my father? No, maybe, I don't know. I ran my hand through my hair, a nervous gesture I usually controlled better. I was trying to protect you from having to keep this secret, from being caught in the middle. I knew if you knew you'd have to choose between my father and my husband. Jesus, Daniel, that's exactly where I am now. Except worse because you lied to me for 3 years. I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you. Oh, please, don't do that. Don't split hairs like omission isn't the same thing. She was pacing now. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. My father tried to fire you. What happened? I told him he couldn't. I showed him the filings. I suggested we handle it properly. Properly. She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. There's nothing proper about this. Do you understand what you've done? Not just to my father, but to me? I work there, Daniel. Everyone is going to think I knew. They're going to think I was part of some kind of scheme. You weren't. I'll make that clear. Oh, you'll make it clear. Great. I'm sure everyone will absolutely believe that the wife had no idea her husband secretly bought controlling interest in her father's company. That's completely plausible. She stopped pacing and looked at me directly, and I saw something in her expression that made my chest constrict. Did you marry me to get closer to the company? What? No, Lauren, no. I married you because I love you. But you already owned part of the company when we met. That's not why I married you. I started buying shares because I thought it was a good investment. I kept buying them because I believed in what your father built. I married you because you're brilliant and funny, and you make me want to be a better version of myself. Those are separate things. Are they? She wrapped her arms around herself despite the garage's stale warmth. How am I supposed to know what was real? We met at a company party. You worked there. You already owned a huge chunk of it. Maybe you saw an opportunity. Stop. My voice came out sharper than I intended. That's not fair, and you know it. You approached me at that party. You asked me out for our first date. You said you loved me first. I've never manipulated you or used you. I've loved you since the night we met, and that has nothing to do with convergence, or your father, or shares, or any of it. She was quiet for a moment, studying my face like she was seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. Why now? She finally launched. Why reveal it now? Your father was firing me, eliminating my position. He had security ready to walk me out. I could have let it happen, but I shrugged helplessly. I'm tired, Lauren. I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of him treating me like I'm nothing. I'm tired of pretending. So this is about my father, about revenge. No, it's about protecting something I've invested in, protecting the company from decisions that are hurting it. Your father's been making mistakes, bad acquisitions, wasteful projects. The culture is deteriorating. I've been watching it happen for months, hoping he'd course correct, but he's not going to, so I'm going to. You're going to what? Fire him? Take over? Become CEO of my father's company? I don't know yet. I called a board meeting for Monday. We'll figure out what happens next. But Lauren, you need to understand something. Your father built something remarkable. Convergence is a good company with good products and good people, but he's been treating it like a personal kingdom, and that's not sustainable. Someone needed to do something before he destroyed what he built. That someone is me. Because you have the power now. Because I'm the majority shareholder and I have a responsibility to protect that investment. Yes. She looked away, out at the rows of cars, at the fluorescent lights creating pools of yellow against concrete gray. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. He's going to hate you. He already hated me. He just didn't think I mattered enough to worry about. He's going to hate me too, for being married to you, for not knowing, for... She shook her head. God, this is such a mess. I know, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have told you from the beginning. I was wrong about that. You were wrong about a lot of things. But some of the anger had leaked out of her voice, replaced by something more complicated. Hurt, maybe, confusion. The specific pain that comes from realizing someone you thought you knew has depths you never suspected. I'm still me, I said quietly. I'm still the person you married, and I still hate cilantro and love terrible action movies. I still think your laugh is the best sound in the world. I'm also someone who made some big financial decisions and didn't tell you about them because I was scared of exactly this moment. Scared I'd leave you? Scared I'd lose you? Scared you'd have to choose between me and your father? Scared I'd ruin the one good thing in my life by trying to fix a problem that wasn't really mine to fix? I stepped closer, close enough to reach out and touch her arm. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. I love you, Lauren. That's the only thing I'm completely certain about right now. Everything else is complicated and messy and probably going to get worse before it gets better, but that part is simple. I love you, I've always loved you, and I will always love you. She was crying now, silently, tears tracking down her face, leaving dark spots on her blazer. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. I don't know if I can be in the middle of whatever is about to happen. You don't have to be in the middle. You can step back. You can take time. You can be angry at me for as long as you need to be. I'll understand. Will you? Really? Because it seems like you're pretty good at not telling me things, so how do I know you'll understand anything? That landed like it was meant to. I nodded, accepting it. I deserve that. You're right. I kept something enormous from you, and that was a betrayal, even if I told myself I was protecting you. I can't take that back. All I can do is promise to be honest going forward about everything. No more secrets, no more invisibility. She wiped her face with her hand, smearing mascara. It made her look younger, more vulnerable. What happens Monday? Board meeting. I present my concerns about recent decisions. We discuss the future direction of the company. Your father is going to fight me. The board is going to have questions. It's going to be ugly. And us? What happens to us? That was the question, wasn't it? The one that mattered more than all the rest of it. The shares, the company, the confrontation, the whole elaborate structure I'd spent 6 years building. That's up to you, I said. I can't make that choice for you. I can only tell you that I want there to be an us on the other side of this. I want to figure out how to be married to you in a way that's honest and real and doesn't involve me keeping huge parts of my life hidden. But if you need time or space or if this is too much, my voice cracked slightly. I'll understand. Lauren looked at me for a long moment. Then she did something I didn't expect. She stepped forward and hugged me, pressing her face against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her and felt her shaking, whether from tears or anger or the adrenaline of everything that had just been revealed. I couldn't tell. I'm so mad at you, she said, her voice muffled by my shirt. I'm furious and hurt and confused. I know, but I also love you, you idiot. Even when you do incomprehensibly stupid things like secretly buying a company without telling your wife. That's fair. She pulled back slightly, enough to look up at me. Her eyes were red, her makeup ruined. She'd never looked more beautiful. I need time to process this. I need to figure out what I think about all of it. About you, about my father, about what happens next. I can't just be okay with this immediately. I don't expect you to be. I'm going to go stay with Katie for a few days. Katie was her best friend since college, a graphic designer who lived in an apartment downtown. I need space to think, to breathe, to not be in the middle of whatever is about to happen. Okay. It hurt, but I understood. Whatever you need. And you need to promise me something. Anything. Don't destroy my father. Whatever you do at that board meeting, whatever changes you make, don't humiliate him. He's difficult and stubborn, and sometimes he's a terrible boss, but he's my dad. He built this company from nothing. He's proud of it. Don't take that from him completely. I thought about the man who'd called me a maintenance worker, who'd decided to fire me without a conversation, who'd made my wife cry more times than I could count with his expectations and judgments, who'd treated people like disposable resources and the company like his personal property. But I also thought about Lauren, standing in a parking garage with tears on her face, asking me to show mercy. I won't humiliate him, I said. I can't promise I won't make changes he disagrees with, but I'll do my best to preserve his dignity, for you Thank you. She kissed me then, briefly, her lips short and salty from tears. I'll call you in a few days, after the meeting, after we both have time to figure out what this means. I'll be waiting. She pulled away, wiping her face again. This is so crazy. My father's gonna lose his mind. He already kinda has. Yeah, well, get ready for him to lose it some more. He's not gonna take this lying down. I know. And Daniel? She was backing toward her car now. The next time you're planning something that affects both our lives, maybe tell me before you execute it. Just a thought. Deal. I watched her drive away, her Tesla gliding silently toward the exit ramp. The brake lights flashed once at the turn, and then she was gone. I stood there for a while longer in the middle of level 3 of a parking garage, in a pool of fluorescent light, feeling the weight of choices made and consequences arriving. Then I got back in my car and pulled out my laptop. I had a presentation to prepare for Monday morning, a vision to articulate, a future to defend. The invisible man was gone. Now I had to figure out what kind of man took his place. Friday passed in a blur of phone calls, document reviews, and the peculiar sensation of watching an organization react to information it didn't have the framework to process. By noon, news of my ownership stake had spread through the company like wildfire. Not the official announcement, that wouldn't come until after Monday's board meeting, but the gossip version, which was somehow both more and less accurate than the truth. In the unofficial narrative circulating through Slack channels and break room conversations, I was variously a secret heir to a tech fortune, an identity thief who'd somehow stolen control of the company, or, my personal favorite, a corporate spy working for a competitor. Jamie from operations had apparently become the primary source of information, having witnessed the confrontation in Richard's office. To his credit, he'd kept the details mostly accurate, though they'd acquired embellishments with each retelling. By the time the story reached me via concerned email from someone in accounting I had never actually spoken to, I'd apparently made Richard turn white as a ghost and delivered my revelation with ice-cold precision worthy of a movie villain. I didn't bother correcting the record. Let them tell their stories. Monday would bring enough clarity. What I did do was work. I spent Friday afternoon in conference calls with the 3 board members I'd identified as potential allies. Margaret Chen, former CFO of a Fortune 500 company, had joined Convergence's board 2 years ago and had been quietly critical of Richard's recent spending. Thomas Wright, a veteran of the tech industry with successful exits from 2 startups, had pushed back against the Meridian acquisition. And Sarah Rodriguez, a corporate governance expert, had been raising concerns about executive accountability that Richard had systematically ignored. None of them had known about my holdings until Thursday. All of them had questions. Walk me through the timeline, Margaret said on our call Friday afternoon. Her video feed showed her in what looked like a home office, professional despite the casual Friday setting. Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like either the most patient long game I've ever seen or something that's going to explode in all our faces. I'd prepared for this question. I opened the presentation I'd been building and shared my screen. Here's the acquisition timeline. A chart appeared, showing my share purchases mapped against the company's stock price and major corporate events. I started buying in 2019, initially as a pure investment play. The company was undervalued. Good fundamentals, strong product, growing market. No insider information and just public data and analysis. You were a contractor then, Thomas noted. Correct. I was doing systems integration work on a project basis. I had no special access to information beyond what was publicly available. And when I became a full-time employee in 2022, I continued buying because the investment thesis remained sound. And when you married Lauren Hartwell? Sarah's voice was carefully neutral. I'd already owned 31% by then. I disclosed this to no one, including Lauren, because there was no legal requirement to do so, and because I wanted to avoid exactly the kind of conflicts we're now facing. That ship has sailed, Margaret observed dryly. Agreed. Which is why I'm being completely transparent now. You all have my complete financial records, every transaction, every acquisition. My lawyers have prepared briefs on the legality of everything I've done. I've also prepared an analysis of the company's current position and my concerns about recent strategic decisions. I advanced to the next slide. This one showed financial data, the cost of the Meridian acquisition, the burn rate of the innovation lab, employee retention statistics, Customer satisfaction trends. Richard has been making decisions that prioritize short-term optics over long-term health. The Meridian acquisition looked good in press releases but added minimal actual value. The Innovation Lab is a vanity project that's bleeding money. Employee morale is at an all-time low. Our best engineers are leaving for competitors. Some of us tried to raise these concerns, Thomas said. Richard wasn't interested in hearing it. Which is part of the problem. He's stopped listening to input. He's stopped treating Convergence as a business with stakeholders and started treating it as his personal property. That needs to change. And you think you should be the one to change it? Sarah asked. You understand how this looks, right? Employee marries CEO's daughter, secretly acquires controlling interest, then moves to take over? I understand exactly how it looks. I also understand that I've been invisible for 3 years, specifically to avoid being seen as a threat. I've watched Richard make bad decision after bad decision. I've hoped he'd course correct. He hasn't. Someone with the authority to intervene needs to intervene. That's me. Margaret leaned forward on her video feed. What's your endgame here, Daniel? Are you planning to fire Richard, take over as CEO? What are we walking into on Monday? This was the question I'd been wrestling with since Thursday. The nuclear option was simple. Exercise my voting power, replace Richard as CEO, install myself or someone else in his position. Clean, decisive, and almost certainly catastrophic for the company's stability and my marriage. The alternative was more complex but potentially more sustainable. I'm proposing a restructuring, I said. Richard stays as CEO but with a newly formed executive committee that has meaningful oversight authority. We bring in an external COO with a track record in operational efficiency. We sunset the Innovation Lab and reallocate those resources to core product development. We reverse the Meridian acquisition or at minimum quarantine it until we can extract actual value. We invest in employee retention and culture repair. You're describing a pretty significant limitation on Richard's authority, Thomas noted. I'm describing accountability, which should already exist but doesn't. Richard built this company. He deserves recognition for that. But he's proven he can't be trusted with unilateral decision-making authority anymore. This isn't about punishing him, it's about saving the company. He's not going to see it that way, Sarah said. To him, this is going to feel like a coup. Then he's going to feel that way. I can't control his interpretation. I can only be clear about my intentions. We talked for another 40 minutes, working through logistics, timing, potential objections, and backup plans. By the end of the call, I had something resembling a coalition. Margaret, Thomas, and Sarah weren't thrilled about the situation, but they understood the necessity of what I was proposing. They'd support the restructuring plan at Monday's meeting. 4 votes in my favor, 3 remaining board members, including Richard, would likely oppose. My 83% share gave me ultimate authority, but having board support would make implementation smoother. After the call ended, I sat in my home office, the spare bedroom we'd converted when Lauren wanted her own workspace, and stared at my notes. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. Lauren's absence was a physical thing, a hole in the space where she should have been. My phone showed no new messages from her. I'd sent a text earlier. Thinking of you. Take all the time you need. I love you, no response. I forced myself to keep working. There was still more to prepare. Detailed proposals for each initiative, financial projections, talking points for questions I anticipated. The work was grounding, focusing my attention on something I could control, while so much else remained uncertain. Around 8 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, then something made me answer. Daniel Morgan. Mr. Morgan, this is Patricia Chen from the Securities and Exchange Commission. The voice was professional, brisk, all business. I'm calling to inform you that we've received your beneficial ownership filing for Convergence Technologies. We have some questions about the timing and structure of your acquisitions. My stomach dropped. I'd known this was possible, inevitable, really. But I'd hoped for more time before regulatory scrutiny began. I'm happy to answer any questions, I said, pulling up the files I'd prepared specifically for this scenario. I have complete documentation of every transaction. I'm sure you do. However, we're particularly interested in your employment at Convergence during the period when you were acquiring shares. There are some concerns about whether proper disclosures were made. I was not a corporate officer or director. I was a rank and file employee. My understanding of the regulations is that I had no disclosure obligations until I crossed the beneficial ownership threshold, which I've now done. Your understanding may be incomplete. When you're an employee acquiring significant ownership, there are some gray areas around what constitutes insider information and whether your employment itself creates disclosure obligations. I closed my eyes, breathed carefully. Am I being accused of insider trading? We're conducting a preliminary inquiry. No accusations have been made. But we will need to speak with you at length about your acquisitions, your information sources, and the timing of certain purchases. We'll be contacting your legal counsel to schedule a formal interview. I'll cooperate fully. I have nothing to hide. We'll see. There was no warmth in her voice, no hint of presumption of innocence. In the meantime, Mr. Morgan, I'd strongly advise you not to take any major actions regarding your ownership stake until we've completed our review. Exercising voting rights, making personnel changes, or otherwise leveraging your position could be viewed as additional evidence of improper conduct. I have a board meeting scheduled for Monday. Then I'd suggest you carefully consider whether attending that meeting is wise at this time. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding my phone, watching the screen fade to black, feeling the floor drop out from under my carefully constructed plan. If the SEC was investigating, everything changed. They could freeze my assets, challenge my ownership, drag this out for months or years. They could find something, some transaction that wasn't quite right, some purchase made with information that could be construed as insider knowledge, and build a case that would destroy not just my ownership stake, but my entire life. More immediately, if I couldn't exercise my voting rights until the investigation concluded, I had no leverage. Richard could move forward with whatever he wanted. He could fire me for real this time, and I'd have no recourse. My revelation would amount to nothing but a confession that made me a target. I called my lawyer, Jason Torres, a corporate attorney I'd retained specifically to handle this situation. He answered on the third ring, sounding like I'd woken him up. Daniel, what's wrong? SEC just called. They're investigating my acquisitions. They're suggesting I not exercise my voting rights until they complete their review. There was a pause. I heard rustling, the sound of him sitting up, probably reaching for a notepad. Okay, this isn't unexpected. Anytime someone builds a position like yours, regulators are going to ask questions. What specifically did they say? I recounted the conversation as precisely as I could remember it. Jason listened without interrupting, and I could hear him making notes. All right, he said when I finished. First, don't panic. This is preliminary. They're doing their due diligence. You've done nothing wrong, and we can demonstrate that. Second, ignore the advice about not exercising your rights. They can suggest that, but unless they get a court order freezing your shares, which they won't because they have no basis for it, you have every legal right to vote your holdings. You're sure? I'm sure. This is pressure tactics. They want you compliant and worried. Don't give them that. Continue with your plans for Monday. Exercise your voting rights. Cooperate with the investigation, but don't act like you've done something wrong because you haven't. What if they find something? Like what? Daniel, I've reviewed every single transaction. You were meticulous. You used public information. You structured everything legally. The only thing they might question is whether your employment created some kind of fiduciary duty that required disclosure, and even that is a massive reach. You were a systems integration specialist, not an executive. You had no insider information. I had knowledge of how the company operated. So does every employee. That's not insider information. That's just experience. He paused. Look, I understand you're worried, but I've been doing securities law for 20 years. This is what they do. They rattle sabers. They ask aggressive questions. They try to intimidate you into backing down. Don't back down. Stand your ground. We'll cooperate fully with the investigation, and it'll eventually conclude that you did nothing wrong. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that doing everything legally meant I was protected. But I'd seen enough to know that legal and safe weren't always the same thing. What would I tell the board? Tell them the truth. You filed beneficial ownership disclosure. The SEC is conducting a routine inquiry. You're cooperating fully. Your ownership stake is legitimate, and your voting rights are intact. Then proceed with your agenda. Richard is going to use this against me. Probably. So get ahead of it. Address it directly. Show you have nothing to hide. The more transparent you are, the less ammunition he has. We talked for another 20 minutes, working through various scenarios and contingencies. By the time we hung up, I felt marginally better. Not good, not confident, but less like I was drowning. I updated my presentation for Monday, adding a section on the SEC inquiry. Better to address it directly than let Richard weaponize it. I prepared statements, anticipated questions, wargamed responses. At some point, I lost track of when, I fell asleep at my desk, head down on my folded arms, laptop still glowing with slide decks and financial projections. I dreamed I was in a parking garage searching for Lauren's car. But every row looked the same, and no matter how many levels I climbed, I couldn't find her. When I woke up, my neck hurt and my mouth tasted like old coffee. Saturday morning light was streaming through the window. My phone showed 3 messages. The first was from Jason. Remember, you did nothing wrong, act like it. The second was from Margaret Chen. Got a call from SEC, interesting timing, we should talk before Monday. The third was from Lauren. How are you holding up? I stared at that last one for a long time. 3 words. Not I love you, or I miss you, or I'm coming home. Just a simple question about my well-being. I typed and deleted several responses. Finally settled on, okay, preparing for Monday, miss you. How are you? The reply came quickly. Confused, scared, angry. But okay. Katie says hi. Tell her I said thank you for taking care of you. She says you're an idiot. She's not wrong. No, she's really not. Then, good luck Monday. I mean that. Whatever happens, I want you to know I believe you didn't do this to hurt my father. I'm not sure why you did it, but I don't think you're malicious. It wasn't I love you, it wasn't come home, but it was something. An acknowledgement that I wasn't a villain in her story, even if I wasn't exactly a hero either, thank you. That means more than you know. Don't blow up his life completely, okay? He's still my dad. I'll do my best. She didn't respond after that. I stared at the screen for a while, then forced myself to put the phone down and get back to work. Saturday passed in a haze of preparation. I ordered in food I barely tasted. I ran through my presentation until I could deliver it in my sleep. I called Margaret, Thomas, and Sarah to brief them on the SEC situation. All 3 took it in stride. Apparently, regulatory inquiries were more common than I'd realized in situations like this. Richard probably triggered it, Margaret said. Called in a favor with someone he knows. Or his lawyers did. It's a standard defensive move. Will it work? Not if you've actually done nothing wrong. The question is whether you have the stomach for this kind of fight, because it's going to get uglier before it gets better. Sunday, I went to the office. The building was mostly empty, just weekend warriors and people with nowhere else to be. I sat at my desk, my cubicle between the break room and the bathrooms, and tried to imagine walking away from all of this. Just selling my shares, taking my profits, finding another job at another company where I could be invisible again. It would be easier, safer. It would probably save my marriage, but I couldn't do it. Not because of the money, though that was real enough. Not because of pride, though that was definitely a factor. But because I'd spent 6 years building this position, making careful decisions, believing in something. I'd been invisible by choice, but I'd never been passive. I'd been waiting for the moment when action became necessary. This was that moment. I couldn't walk away from it any more than I could stop breathing. Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m. The board meeting was scheduled for 9:00 cock. I had 2.5 hours to finalize everything. I wore a suit, the one good suit I owned, navy blue, tailored, the kind of thing I never wore to the office. It felt like armor, like a costume for the person I needed to pretend to be. Confident, authoritative, in control. At 8:45, I made my way to the executive conference room on the 6th floor. Through the glass walls, I could see people gathering. The board members, Richard talking intensely to someone I recognized as his personal lawyer. The general counsel, Gerald Morrison, setting up a laptop for video conferencing. I stood outside for a moment, watching through the glass. Inside that room, my invisible period would officially end. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just the future of the company, but the shape of my entire life. My phone buzzed. A text from Lauren. You've got this, be better than him. I typed back, "I'll try." Then I opened the door and walked into the next chapter of a story I'd been writing in secret for 6 years, finally ready to show the world what I'd been building in the shadows. The executive conference room at Convergence Technologies was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows on two sides, a table that could seat 20 made of some dark wood that probably cost more than my car, and walls decorated with awards and framed news articles about the company's various milestones. It was Richard's stage, carefully constructed to remind anyone who entered exactly who was in charge. This morning, though, the power dynamics were different. I was the last to arrive. Not intentionally, I'd actually been standing outside the door for 3 minutes, gathering myself. But the effect was the same. Everyone turned to look as I entered, and in that moment, I could feel the shift. I wasn't the quiet systems integration specialist anymore. I was the person they'd all been texting about, gossiping about, trying to understand. Daniel. Gerald Morrison, the general counsel, gestured to a seat halfway down the table. We saved you a spot. The positioning was interesting. Not at the head of the table where Richard sat, but not at the far end with junior staff either. Somewhere in the middle, a location that acknowledged my presence without yet committing to my status. I took the seat without comment and set down the folder containing my presentation materials. Across from me sat Margaret Chen, who gave me a subtle nod. Thomas Wright was next to her, looking relaxed despite the tension in the room. Sarah Rodriguez was at the far end, her expression unreadable. Richard sat at the head of the table, his lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Helen Kramer, positioned to his right. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite parse. Anger, certainly, but also something else. Maybe fear. Maybe just the cognitive dissonance of having to reconceptualize someone he'd categorized as insignificant. Now that we're all here, Richard began, let's get started. Gerald, you have the floor. Gerald stood, adjusting his glasses. He looked uncomfortable, a man caught between professional obligations and personal loyalties. Thank you, Richard. As you all know, we've been called here to address a significant disclosure made by Daniel Morgan regarding his beneficial ownership stake in Convergence Technologies. On Thursday, November 7th, Mr. Morgan filed documentation indicating that he owns approximately 83.4% of the company's outstanding shares. He pulled up a slide on the screen at the end of the room. It showed a pie chart that made the situation brutally clear. My wedge took up almost the entire circle. Richard's 11% looked like a rounding error by comparison. This filing came as a surprise to the board and to management. We've spent the last 3 days verifying the documentation, and I can confirm that Mr. Morgan's holdings appear to be legitimate. He's been acquiring shares over a period of approximately 6 years through multiple entities and brokerage accounts. Appear to be legitimate, Helen Kramer interjected. But the SEC is investigating, are they not? They've initiated a preliminary inquiry, Gerald acknowledged, which is standard for this type of disclosure. But as of right now, there's no indication of impropriety. Standard, Helen repeated. Is it also standard for an employee to secretly acquire controlling interest in the company where he works while providing no disclosure to management or the board? There's no legal requirement for an employee to disclose share ownership unless they're a corporate officer or director, Gerald said. Mr. Morgan was neither, but he was married to the CEO's daughter. Surely that creates some kind of conflict of interest or disclosure obligation. Personal relationships don't trigger securities disclosure requirements. Helen looked like she wanted to argue further, but Richard put a hand on her arm, stopping her. He was still staring at me. Let's cut through the legal posturing, he said. Daniel, why don't you tell us why you're here, what you want, what this is all about? All eyes turned to me. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for, rehearsing, dreading. I took a breath and stood up. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate the direct approach. I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the room's display system. I'm here to discuss the future of Convergence Technologies, a company I've believed in for 6 years, a company I've invested significantly in both financially and personally, a company that I'm concerned is heading in the wrong direction. My first slide appeared on the screen. It showed the company's stock price over the past 3 years, with annotations marking major decisions and their impacts. When I started buying shares in 2019, Convergence was undervalued but had strong fundamentals, Good products, good people, good market position. The investment thesis was sound. Over time, as I learned more about the company, first as a contractor, then as an employee, I became more convinced that we had significant potential for growth. We, Richard said. Interesting pronoun choice. I'm the majority shareholder. It is, objectively, we now. I advanced to the next slide. But over the past 18 months, I've watched decisions being made that concern me. The Meridian acquisition, for example. The slide showed financial data on the acquisition. Purchase price, supposed synergies, actual performance. We paid $47 million for a company that's added less than $3 million in actual value. The promised synergies haven't materialized. The integration has been a disaster. We're basically subsidizing a failing business while cannibalizing our own customer base. That acquisition was thoroughly vetted, Richard said, his voice tight. The board approved it. The board approved what you presented to them, I countered. But the due diligence was incomplete. The financial projections were overly optimistic, and the strategic rationale was more about making a headline than making sound business sense. Margaret cleared her throat. Daniel's right. Some of us raised concerns at the time, but we were assured the analysis was solid. The analysis was solid, Richard snapped. Just because integration has been challenging doesn't mean it's not just Meridian, I interrupted, advancing to my next slide. The Innovation Lab, $8 million annual burn rate for what? A few prototypes that will never see production? Some feel-good press releases about how forward-thinking we are? Innovation requires investment, Richard said. You have to spend money to what? We're not a research institution. We're a business. Every dollar we spend on that lab is a dollar we're not spending on our core products, on our people, on actually growing the business. I pulled up another slide. Employee retention. Our voluntary turnover rate has increased by 40% in the last year. Our best engineers are leaving for competitors. Why? Because the culture has become toxic, because people don't feel valued, because leadership has become disconnected from the reality on the ground. That's a gross oversimplification, Richard said. The tech labor market is competitive. People leave, that's reality. People leave companies with bad leadership, I said quietly. They stay when they believe in where the company is going. Right now, they don't believe. The room was silent. Helen Kramer was taking notes furiously. The board members were studying the data on the screen with varying expressions of concern or resignation. So what are you proposing? Sarah Rodriguez asked. What's your solution? I advanced to my final section of slides. Restructuring. Not of personnel, at least not initially, but of governance and authority. I'm proposing we create an executive committee with meaningful oversight over strategic decisions. We bring in an external COO with operational experience to handle day-to-day management. We sunset the Innovation Lab and reallocate those resources. We conduct a comprehensive review of the Meridian acquisition and either extract actual value or divest. And we invest seriously in employee retention and culture repair. You want to strip me of authority, Richard said flatly. That's what this is. I want to create accountability, which should already exist but doesn't. I built this company from nothing. I grew it into what it is today. And you think you can just walk in here and... I didn't walk in, Richard. I've been here for 3 years, working, contributing, watching, and yes, investing. Building a stake significant enough that when I finally decided to speak up, I'd have the authority to make changes that need to be made. This is a coup. This is corporate governance. I'm the majority shareholder exercising my rights to protect my investment. If you'd been listening to input from the board, from employees, from people who actually know what they're talking about, we wouldn't be here. But you've stopped listening. You've started treating this company like your personal kingdom. That needs to change. Richard's face had gone red. You married my daughter to get access, to get position. This whole thing has been a scheme. Stop. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Lauren has nothing to do with this. I started buying shares 2 years before I met her. I married her because I love her, not because of anything to do with this company. Don't drag her into this to avoid taking responsibility for your own decisions. Gentlemen, Gerald intervened, let's keep this professional. Professional, Richard laughed bitterly. There's nothing professional about this. This is personal. This is revenge for what? For not promoting you fast enough? For not treating you like you were special? For treating me like I was nothing, I said quietly. For calling me a maintenance worker. For deciding to fire me without even a conversation about performance or fit. For systematically undermining anyone who questioned your decisions. For losing sight of what this company is supposed to be. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. I don't want your job, Richard. I don't want to destroy what you built. But I'm not going to stand by while you hollow it out from the inside. The company matters more than any one person's ego, including mine, including yours. The silence that followed was profound. Through the windows, I could see the Austin skyline, the morning sun reflecting off glass towers. Margaret Chen spoke first. I think Daniel's restructuring proposal has merit. We've needed better governance for a while now. This is an opportunity to implement changes that will benefit everyone. I agree, Thomas Wright added. The executive committee model is sound. Bringing in operational expertise makes sense, and the cultural issues are real. We need to address them. So you're all just going to side with him? Richard demanded. Just roll over because he's bought enough shares to force this? We're siding with what's best for the company, Sarah said carefully, which right now means implementing some checks and balances. This is my company. With respect, Richard, Margaret said, it's not. It's a publicly traded company with shareholders and stakeholders. You've been an excellent founder and CEO, but even excellent leaders need oversight. Richard looked around the table, seeing the math in their faces. Then he turned to Helen, his lawyer, who leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear. He nodded slowly, then stood up. I need to consult with counsel. We're taking a recess, 30 minutes. He walked out without waiting for a response. Helen gathered her materials and followed. The door closed behind them with a soft click. The remaining board members looked at each other, then at me. Well, Thomas said finally, that went about as badly as expected. He's going to fight this, Gerald said. Even with your voting majority, Daniel. He's going to make this painful. Legal challenges, media battles, internal politics. Are you prepared for that? I don't know, I admitted, but I don't see another option. Do you? Gerald shook his head. No. I have been trying to get Richard to moderate his approach for months. He doesn't hear it. Maybe this is what it takes. Margaret stood up and came around the table to where I was sitting. That SEC inquiry. Are you worried? My lawyer says it's routine. Pressure tactics. Your lawyer's right. I've been through a few of these. They'll ask aggressive questions, make it seem like you're about to be charged with something, then quietly close the investigation when they don't find anything. But the timing is suspicious. Richard or his people probably triggered it. I figured. Don't let it spook you. You did everything legally. Stand your ground. The 30-minute recess stretched to 45. I spent it reviewing my notes, responding to increasingly concerned texts from Lauren. Is he okay? Is anyone yelling? And trying not to think too hard about what Richard and his lawyer were planning. When they finally returned, Richard's expression had shifted. The raw anger had been replaced by something colder, more calculated. He sat down and folded his hands on the table. I've consulted with counsel, he said, and we've decided to take a different approach. Daniel, you want oversight? Accountability? You'll get it. We'll form your executive committee. We'll bring in a COO. We'll review the innovation lab budget. All of it. I waited. There was clearly more. In exchange, Richard continued, you're going to take a board seat, a director position. You're going to be formally part of governance, which means you'll have fiduciary duties, disclosure requirements, and all the legal obligations that come with that. No more operating in the shadows, no more secret maneuvering. Everything you do is going to be transparent and subject to scrutiny. It was a trap, but a clever one. By joining the board, I'd be giving up some of the flexibility I'd had as a pure shareholder. I'd be subject to more oversight, more restrictions. But declining would make me look like I was afraid of accountability, which would undermine everything I just said about wanting transparency. I accept, I said. On one condition. What's that? You stay as CEO. I meant what I said. I don't want your job. But you accept the executive committee's oversight. You work with the COO rather than around them. You start listening to input from the board and from employees. This restructuring is a partnership, not a takeover. Richard studied me for a long moment. You really believe that? That we can work together after this? I think we have to try, for the company's sake, I hesitated. For Lauren's sake, something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or recognition of just how complicated this had all become. Fine, he said finally. We'll try it your way. But understand something, Daniel. I'm not going to forget what you did here. And the secrecy, the timing, the way you undermined me. And I'm not going to forget why it became necessary, I replied. But hopefully we can both focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on how we got here. Gerald cleared his throat. Then, if we're in agreement, we should formalize this. I'll draft resolutions for the executive committee structure, the COO search, and Daniel's appointment to the board. We'll vote at our next regular meeting, but I think it's clear how the votes will go. One more thing, I said. An announcement, internal and external, explaining the ownership change, the governance restructuring, and the rationale behind it. I want to control the narrative before rumors get worse than they already are. We'll need to coordinate with communications, Richardson said, and PR. This needs to be handled carefully. Agreed. I'll work with your team on messaging. My team. He smiled without humor. I suppose it's your team now, too. That's going to take some getting used to. We spent another hour working through logistics, timeline, communication strategy. It was surreal, sitting at that table, discussing corporate governance with my father-in-law while knowing that my wife was staying with a friend because she couldn't stand to be around either of us. But it was also progress. Messy, painful progress. The invisible period was over. Now came the hard work of figuring out what visibility actually meant. The meeting finally adjourned at 11:30. Board members filed out, some stopping to shake my hand or offer quiet words of support. Margaret lingered. You did well, she said, but that couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. Still isn't. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. Richard's going to test you. Push boundaries. See how much authority you're actually willing to exercise. You need to be ready for that. I know. She squeezed my shoulder. For what it's worth, I think you're right about the company, about the direction we need to go. Not everyone would have had the patience to build the position you built, or the courage to use it. After she left, I was alone in the conference room with the detritus of the meeting. Empty coffee cups, scattered papers, the lingering tension. I stood by the window, looking out at the city, trying to process everything that had just happened. My phone rang. Lauren, I answered immediately. Hey, how did it go? Her voice was careful, guarded. I've been checking the company Slack. People are saying there was a meeting, but no one knows what happened yet. It went okay, I think. Your father agreed to the restructuring. I'm joining the board. We're going to try to make this work. He must have been furious. He was. He is. But he's professional enough to see when he doesn't have good options. We worked out a compromise. A compromise where you got everything you wanted. Not everything. I wanted this to happen without destroying relationships. That part. I trailed off. Yeah, she sighed. That part is going to take time. Are you coming home? Another pause. Not yet. I need a few more days. But Daniel, I'm proud of you for standing up for what you believed in. Even if the way you did it was incredibly stupid and frustrating, I laughed. More from relief than humor. I'll take that. I love you. Even when you're an idiot who buys companies without telling his wife. I love you, too. So much. I know. Her voice softened. Call me tonight. Tell me more about what happened. I want to hear everything, even the parts that make my father look bad. I will. Promise. After we hung up, I stayed at the window for a few more minutes. The morning sun was higher now, warming the glass. Somewhere in the building below, employees were working, unaware that everything had just shifted. Tomorrow, there'd be an announcement. Shock. Gossip, probably some anger. Definitely a lot of questions. But for now, in this moment, I let myself feel it. The weight lifting, the mask coming off, the exhaustion of invisibility finally ending. I'd been nobody for 3 years, watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal what I'd been building in secret. That moment had come and gone. Now I had to figure out what came next, how to lead without dominating, how to change without destroying, how to be visible without losing the parts of myself that invisibility had protected. I didn't have all the answers yet. But for the first time in 6 years, I was asking the questions out loud in a room where people could hear them. That was something. That was a start. The announcement went out Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Gerald and the communications team had worked through the night to craft something that balanced transparency with damage control. The email to all employees came first, with the subject line, Important Update on Company Ownership and Governance. I read it from my cubicle, the same cubicle between the break room and the bathrooms where I'd spent 3 years being nobody, with a coffee going cold in my hand. Dear Convergence team, we are writing to share some important information about changes in company ownership and governance. Daniel Morgan, a systems integration specialist who has been with Convergence since 2022, has disclosed that he is the majority shareholder of the company, holding approximately 83% of outstanding shares. This ownership stake was accumulated over several years through legal market purchases and was recently disclosed in compliance with SEC regulations. Following discussions with the board of directors, we have agreed to implement several governance changes. Formation of an executive committee to provide strategic oversight. Daniel will join the board of directors. We will be recruiting an external COO to strengthen operations. A comprehensive review of recent acquisitions and initiatives. Richard Hartwell will continue as CEO, and these changes represent an evolution in our governance structure rather than a departure from our fundamental mission and values. We understand this news may raise questions. We will be holding an all-hands meeting on Thursday at 2 p.m. where leadership will address concerns and discuss our path forward. Thank you for your continued dedication to Convergence. Sincerely, the board of directors. Within minutes, my phone exploded with messages. Slack lit up with reactions ranging from shock to confusion to, surprisingly, some expressions of support. Jamie from operations sent me a gif of a mic drop. Someone from engineering wrote, "Holy shit, dude, you've been playing 4D chess while the rest of us played checkers." Not everyone was pleased. There were concerns about stability, questions about my qualifications, speculation about what this meant for future layoffs. Fair concerns, all of them. What I hadn't anticipated was the reaction from people who'd been quiet sufferers of the culture problems I'd mentioned in the board meeting. Within an hour, my email inbox contained 17 messages from employees I'd barely interacted with, all variations on the same theme. Thank you, someone needed to do something. Things have been bad. One message from a senior engineer named Maria Chen, who'd been with the company for 8 years, stood out. Daniel, I don't know you well, but I want you to know that a lot of us saw what was happening. The morale issues, the bad decisions, the way concerns were ignored. I almost quit last month. I had an offer from a competitor, but something made me wait. Maybe this was why. I hope you're serious about fixing the culture. We have good people here who want to do good work. We just need leadership that listens. If you need help understanding what's really broken, my door is open. Or my cubicle, I guess, since I don't have a door. Good luck. We're counting on you. I read it 3 times, feeling the weight of those last 5 words. We're counting on you. I'd spent 6 years thinking about this in terms of financial returns, strategic positioning, corporate governance. I'd thought about protecting my investment, about exercising authority, about proving Richard wrong about who I was. What I hadn't fully considered was that by revealing my ownership, I'd become responsible for other people's hopes. For Maria Chen's decision not to quit. For the quiet sufferers who saw my intervention as a potential rescue. That responsibility felt heavier than the shares themselves. I was still processing this when Richard appeared at my cubicle. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept, which he probably hadn't. "We need to talk," he said. Not a request. I followed him to a small conference room on the same floor. He closed the door and stood with his arms crossed, not quite blocking the exit, but not quite inviting me to sit either. "Lauren called me this morning," he said without preamble. "She's upset, angry at both of us, actually, which is something. I haven't heard her that worked up since college, when her roommate borrowed her car and totaled it. I can imagine." "No, I don't think you can. You don't have kids, Daniel. You don't know what it's like to watch someone hurt your daughter and not be able to fix it." He paused. "Even when that someone is yourself." I waited. There was clearly more. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about me stopping listening, about treating the company like a kingdom." He rubbed his face. "The thing is, you're not entirely wrong. I got comfortable. I built this from nothing, and somewhere along the way, I started believing that meant I always knew best. That questioning me was the same as betraying the mission. Richard, let me finish. I'm not saying I agree with how you did this. The secrecy, the timing, the way you've essentially forced my hand, that's. He struggled for words. That's hard to forgive. But the substance of what you said about the company, about Meridian, about the lab, about culture, I'm not blind. I've seen people leaving. I've seen the data. I didn't want to admit what it meant. Which was what? That I was failing. That the thing I built, the thing I've dedicated 20 years of my life to, was breaking under my management. That's not easy to face, Daniel. Especially not from your daughter's husband, standing in your office, telling you you're about to be fired. I wasn't going to fire you, weren't you? If I'd fought this harder, if I'd refused to compromise, what would you have done? Would you really have let me stay in charge? Honest answer? I didn't know. I told myself I wouldn't fire him, that I wanted a partnership, not a coup. But if he'd refused every reform, stonewalled every change, would I have really backed down? I guess we're lucky we didn't have to find out, I said finally. Lucky. He laughed without humor. Is that what we are? He sat down, suddenly looking older than his 57 years. My daughter's staying with a friend because she can't stand to be around either of us. I have to work with my son-in-law, who I've systematically disrespected for 3 years and who now has the authority to end my career with a phone call. The SEC is investigating someone in my family. And the company I built is going to be run by committee now instead of by me. So yes, I suppose we're very lucky. I sat down across from him. I don't want to be your enemy, Richard. You're the majority shareholder who threatened my position. What else would you be? Someone who wants the same thing you want. For convergence to succeed, for it to be what it's supposed to be. We can fight each other for the next 5 years and destroy what you built, or we can figure out how to work together despite everything that's happened. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's probably impossible. But what's the alternative? He was quiet for a long time, staring at the table. When he finally looked up, his expression was complicated, resignation mixed with something that might have been respect. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. More patient, more strategic. I underestimated you, and that was stupid. He paused. But you underestimated something too. What's that? How much this company means to me. It's not just a business, Daniel. It's not just an investment or a strategic position or whatever you saw in your analysis. It's 20 years of my life. It's every risk I took, every sacrifice I made. It's proof that I could build something that mattered. You can't quantify that in a spreadsheet. I know, that's why I wanted you to stay as CEO. Did you, or did you just know it would be easier politically? Less disruptive to have me as a figurehead while you pull the strings? I'm not going to pull strings. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Accountability, partnership. Just different voices at the table instead of one voice making every call. You don't have to like it, Richard, but you do have to accept it. He stood up abruptly. The all-hands meeting Thursday. We're going to present a unified front. Whatever our personal feelings, whatever the politics, we show the company that leadership is stable and aligned. Can you do that? Yes? Good. Because if this falls apart, if the company suffers because of the chaos we've created, that's on both of us, not just me. Both of us. He walked to the door, then turned back. And Daniel? Fix things with Lauren. Whatever happens with the company, she matters more. Don't forget that while you're playing corporate chess. He left before I could respond. I sat there for a while, thinking about what he'd said, about underestimating what the company meant to him, about responsibility, about Lauren. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Chen. Board call at 4 p.m. COO search kickoff. Are you joining? I'll be there. Another text, this one from the General Counsel. SEC wants to schedule your interview. Next week work? Yes, coordinate with my lawyer. Another from Thomas Wright. Press release went out. Wall Street Journal called. This is going to be news. Wonderful. I opened my laptop and started working through the flood of messages and meeting invitations that had arrived since the announcement. Every department head wanted to talk. Every project manager wanted clarification on what this meant for their initiatives. The head of HR wanted to discuss employee communication strategy. Visibility, it turned out, was exhausting. At some point, I lost track of when, Jamie appeared with 2 coffees and a knowing look. You look like you need this, he said, handing me one. Thanks. So, majority shareholder. That's wild, man. How long were you planning this? I wasn't planning anything, I was investing. The rest just evolved. Evolved, he grinned. Is that what we're calling a masterclass in corporate chess? Evolution? It wasn't chess, it was survival. Survival. His grin faded. What does that mean? I told him about the dinner, the maintenance worker comment, the casual dismissiveness that had accumulated over 3 years. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he nodded slowly. Yeah, I've seen that. The way Richard treats people he thinks are beneath him. It's not overt, he's too smart for that. But it's there. The slight condescension, the way he looks through you instead of at you. He paused. I always wondered if you noticed. I noticed. But you didn't say anything, you just bought the company instead. When he put it that way, it sounded absurd, petty even. But it hadn't been that simple, or maybe it had been exactly that simple, and I'd constructed elaborate rationalizations to avoid admitting I'd let personal grievance drive a 6-year financial strategy. I believed in the company, I said. That part is true. I saw value the market missed. The rest, I shrugged. The rest is more complicated. Yeah, he sipped his coffee. Everything always is, isn't it? Thursday's all-hands meeting was held in the largest conference room we had, with overflow rooms set up and a video feed for remote employees. By 1:45, every seat was filled, and people were lining the walls. The energy in the room was nervous, expectant, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Richard and I stood at the front with the rest of the executive team. We'd coordinated outfits, business, professional, united front, and rehearsed our talking points. He'd present the governance changes as a natural evolution. I'd speak briefly about my vision for the company. We'd take questions together, showing we could work as partners. That was the plan, anyway. At 2:00 sharp, Richard stepped up to the microphone. Thank you all for joining us. I know Tuesday's announcement raised questions, and we want to address those directly. He gestured to me. Some of you know Daniel Morgan as a colleague in systems integration. What you might not know is that he's been a significant investor in Convergence for several years, and recently disclosed he's our majority shareholder. A ripple went through the crowd. People who'd only read the email now seeing the reality standing in front of them. I'll be honest, this came as a surprise to me too. A few nervous laughs. But after discussions with Daniel and the board, I'm confident this represents an opportunity, a chance to strengthen our governance, improve our operations, and recommit to the culture and values that made Convergence successful. He outlined the changes, the executive committee, the COO search, my board seat. He was professional, controlled, hitting all the right notes. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed he meant every word. Then he turned to me. Daniel, you want to add anything? I stepped onto the microphone, looking out at hundreds of faces, colleagues I'd worked alongside for 3 years, most of whom had barely registered my existence. Now they were hanging on my every word. I know this situation is unusual, I began, and I know trust is earned, not demanded, so I'm not going to ask you to trust me yet. I'm going to ask you to judge me by my actions over the coming months. I paused, making eye contact with Maria Chen in the third row. I started investing in Convergence because I believed in what we do. The products we build, the problems we solve, the potential we have to be more than just another software company. But believing isn't enough. We have to make good decisions. We have to listen to the people doing the actual work. We have to build a culture where everyone feels valued. I'm not here to be CEO. I'm not here to replace Richard or dismantle what he's built. I'm here to help ensure we're making choices that serve the company's long-term health. That's it. That's the vision. The room was silent. Then someone in the back started clapping. Others joined. Not everyone. I saw skeptical faces, crossed arms, people who weren't buying it. But enough. Enough to suggest this might possibly be okay. The Q&A was predictably difficult. People wanted to know about job security, about the Meridian review, about whether I planned to make wholesale changes. Richard and I traded answers, trying to present a unified front, even when our actual positions weren't fully aligned. Near the end, someone from engineering, a young woman I recognized but couldn't name, stood up. This question is for Daniel. You've been here 3 years working as a regular employee while secretly owning most of the company. That seems... She searched for words. Dishonest? How are we supposed to trust someone who kept something that significant secret? Fair question. Brutal, but fair. You're right that I kept this quiet, I said. And you're right to question my judgment there. My rationale was that I wanted to understand the company from the inside before exercising any ownership authority. I wanted to see how we actually operated, and not just how things looked from the executive level. But you're also right that there's a cost to that approach. A cost in trust, in transparency, in the relationships I might have built if I'd been upfront from the beginning. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. I can't change how I got here. I can only be honest about where we are now and what happens next, which is this. I'm going to be visible. I'm going to be accessible. I'm going to make decisions transparently and accept accountability for them. And if I fail to do that, you should absolutely call me out, loudly, publicly, because that's how this works. That's how we build trust. She sat down looking like she might believe me, or might not. Hard to tell. The meeting ended at 3:30. People filed out slowly, talking in small groups, processing. Richard and I stayed at the front, fielding individual questions from employees who wanted more detail. Maria Chen approached me as things were winding down. That was good, she said. Not perfect, but honest. That counts for something. I hope so. The culture stuff you mentioned, are you serious about that? Completely. Then you need to talk to people in engineering. Really talk, not just send a survey. We have exit interview data that would make your hair curl. Turnover isn't random, it's systematic, and it's fixable, but only if the leadership actually wants to fix it. Set up time on my calendar. I want to hear everything. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I'm holding you to that. After she left, Richard and I were finally alone. He loosened his tie, the first crack in his carefully maintained professional facade. That went better than I expected, he admitted. People want to be heard. They want to believe things can improve. We gave them a reason to hope. Now we have to deliver. He said it like he was testing the word. I'm still getting used to that. Me too. My phone buzzed, a text from Lauren. Watch the live stream. You did good, both of you. Call me tonight. I showed Richard the message. He read it and something in his face softened. She's talking to both of us. That's something. It is. Daniel, about what I said before. About you fixing things with Lauren. I meant that, but I should probably work on fixing things with her, too. I haven't been the father she deserved these past few years. Too focused on the company, too demanding, too... He trailed off. Too much like me? I suggested. He laughed, surprising both of us. Maybe. God help us, maybe we're more alike than I want to admit. Stubborn, convinced we're right. Bad at asking for help. Terrible at admitting weakness. Married to women who deserve better. On that last point, I said, we're definitely alike. We stood there for a moment. Two men who'd been adversaries 48 hours ago, trying to figure out if partnership was even possible. I didn't have the answer yet. Maybe he didn't either, but we were trying. That counted for something. Board call in 30 minutes, Richard said, checking his watch. COO search parameters, you ready? Ready as I'll ever be. Welcome to visibility, Daniel. Try not to miss being invisible too much. I thought about my cubicle, between the break room and the bathrooms. About 3 years of being nobody. About the strange freedom of not mattering. I don't think I will, I said. Not anymore. 3 months later, I was sitting in that same executive conference room, where everything had shifted, listening to candidates for the COO position present their visions for Convergence's operational future. We were on candidate number 7, a woman named Patricia Holloway, who'd been COO at 3 different tech companies and had a reputation for organizational transformation that bordered on surgical. She'd been talking for 40 minutes, walking through her 90-day plan with the kind of detailed competence that made you believe she could actually deliver everything she was promising. Richard, sitting across from me at the table, was taking notes. Actual notes. Which was new. A lot was new. The SEC investigation had concluded in January with a terse letter stating that they'd found no evidence of improper conduct and were closing their inquiry. My lawyers had been right. It was pressure tactics, an attempt to rattle me into backing down. When I hadn't, they'd reviewed the documentation, found everything in order, and moved on to more promising targets. Richard had never explicitly said he was behind the investigation being triggered, but he hadn't denied it either. We'd reached an unspoken agreement not to litigate the past. We had enough to deal with in the present. The Meridian acquisition review had been ugly. Thomas Wright had led a special committee that spent 6 weeks dissecting every aspect of the deal. Their conclusion: we'd paid by at least $20 million. The integration strategy had been fundamentally flawed, and the supposed synergies were mostly fantasy. We'd quietly put Meridian up for sale in February. We'd take a loss, but cutting our losses was better than continuing to hemorrhage money. The innovation lab had been harder. Richard had fought me on that one, arguing that shutting it down would signal we weren't forward-thinking. But the data was undeniable. $8 million annual burn rate, producing nothing of commercial value. We'd compromised, consolidated it into a smaller R&D function embedded within product development, cut the budget by 70%, and required every project to have a clear path to revenue. Richard hadn't liked it, but he'd accepted it. The executive committee met weekly. Margaret Chen chaired it, which was brilliant positioning. She had the authority to push back on both Richard and me without it becoming personal. The committee had already killed 2 initiatives Richard had wanted to pursue and challenged 3 of my suggestions for being too aggressive on timeline. It was working exactly as it should, creating accountability, forcing better decisions, preventing either of us from operating unilaterally. But the biggest change was cultural, and that had been the hardest. Maria Chen from engineering had been right about the exit interview data. When I'd actually sat down and read through a year's worth of departures, the patterns were impossible to ignore. People weren't leaving for better pay or shinier opportunities. They were leaving because they felt unheard, undervalued, and uncertain about the company's direction. They were leaving because middle management had learned to manage up to Richard's preferences rather than managing down to their team's needs. They were leaving because the culture had become one where looking good mattered more than being good. Fixing that required more than policy changes. It required changed behavior from leadership. Starting with me and Richard, we'd instituted monthly town halls where any employee could ask any question. No pre-screening, no prepared answers, just honest dialogue. The first one had been painful. People had 3 years of grievances and they aired them all. Richard had sat there taking it, visibly uncomfortable, but disciplined enough not to get defensive. I'd done the same, acknowledging my own failures of invisibility, the ways I'd watched problems without intervening. By the 3rd town hall, the questions had shifted from angry to constructive. People were starting to believe we meant it, that we actually wanted their input. We'd also changed how we made decisions. Major initiatives now required input sessions with affected teams before going to the executive committee. Not just token consultation, real input that could change outcomes. It slowed things down, but the decisions that emerged were better, more grounded in reality. Richard had struggled with this more than anything. He was used to deciding and announcing, not collaborating and iterating. But he was trying. I'd watched him in meetings catch himself starting to lecture, visibly pause, and instead ask a question. It wasn't natural for him yet, but he was doing it. We'd also hired a head of people operations, someone from outside the company who could rebuild HR from first principles. She'd implemented anonymous feedback mechanisms, revised the performance review system to focus on growth rather than ranking, and started running leadership training that actually challenged executives rather than just validating them. The results were early but promising. Voluntary turnover had stabilized, employee engagement scores were trending up. We'd even had 3 people who'd left come back, saying they'd heard things were different now and wanted to give Convergence another chance. None of this meant everything was fixed. We still had problems: legacy code that needed refactoring, customer relationships that needed repair, strategic decisions that would take years to bear fruit. But the trajectory felt right, like we were building something sustainable rather than just maintaining appearances. Patricia Holloway finished her presentation and looked at us expectantly. Questions? Your operational efficiency targets, Margaret said. They're aggressive. Walk me through how you'd achieve a 15% cost reduction without impacting product quality or employee morale. Patricia launched into details about process optimization, vendor renegotiation, and strategic automation. She was impressive. More impressive than the previous 6 candidates, all of whom had been technically qualified, but lacking some crucial element. Cultural fit, strategic vision, or the specific blend of toughness and empathy this role required. Richard leaned toward me and whispered, "She's good. She is." I agreed. "You want to make an offer?" After one more reference check. But yes, I think she's the one. He nodded and made a note. This was how we operated now, checking in with each other, building consensus, making decisions jointly. It was slower than Richard's old unilateral style, but it was also more sustainable. The interview concluded. We thanked Patricia and told her we'd be in touch within 24 hours. After she left, the executive committee convened to discuss. "I like her," Thomas said immediately. "She's been through organizational transformation before. She knows what she's getting into." "Her references are all strong," Sarah added. "Former colleagues say she's demanding but fair, gets results without leaving bodies in her wake." "What about culture fit?" Richard asked. "Can she work within the structure we've built here? The executive committee oversight, the collaborative decision-making? Some COOs want more autonomy." "I asked her about that directly," Margaret said. "She said she prefers working with strong governance. Less rope to hang herself with," was how she put it. We talked through compensation, start date, reporting structure. An hour later, we'd agreed to make an offer. Gerald would draft the terms and reach out to her lawyer. After the committee dispersed, Richard and I walked back toward our offices together. Not my cubicle anymore. I'd moved to a real office on the 6th floor after joining the board, partly because the board insisted and partly because trying to take confidential calls from a cubicle next to the break room had become impossible. "Lauren's coming for dinner Sunday," Richard said as we walked. "You should join us, both of you." This was new, too. Family dinners had resumed in March, tentative at first, heavy with unspoken tension. But we were all trying. Richard was making an effort to see me as something other than a threat. Evelyn, Lauren's mother, was playing mediator with the grace of someone who'd spent decades managing complicated family dynamics. And Lauren was finding her way back to both of us. "I'll check with her," I said, "but I think we can make it work." "Good." He paused outside his office door. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you happy with how this turned out?" It was an unexpectedly personal question. Richard didn't usually traffic in emotional inquiry. I considered my answer carefully. "I'm not sure happy is the right word," I said finally. "Satisfied, maybe, like I did something difficult that needed doing and survived it. But happy implies an endpoint, and this doesn't feel like an endpoint. It feels like we're in the middle of something that's going to take years to fully understand." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. I feel something similar, like I'm trying to learn a new way of doing something I've done the same way for 20 years. It's uncomfortable. But maybe that's growth. Maybe discomfort is what growth feels like. Maybe." "Lauren told me she's proud of both of us. Did she tell you that?" "Not in those exact words, but she's implied it. She said we're both trying to be better than we were, that we're both taking responsibility for the mess we created." He smiled slightly. "She also said we're both still idiots, but idiots who are at least trying to learn." That sounds like Lauren. It does. He looked at me directly, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen before. Not quite friendship, that might be too much to expect, but respect, recognition. "You know what the hardest part of this has been for me?" "What's that?" "Admitting you were right. About the company, about my blind spots, about needing accountability. I've spent 3 months watching you prove that you actually do care about convergence. That this wasn't just some elaborate revenge scheme or power play. You genuinely wanted to succeed." "I do. I know. I see it now. I didn't at first. I thought you were going to come in and tear everything down, prove that you were smarter than me, humiliate me in front of everyone. But you haven't done that. You've been—" He searched for the word. "Gracious. Even when you didn't have to be. Even when I probably didn't deserve it. Richard, let me finish. I'm not good at this, so let me get it out." He took a breath. "I was wrong about you. Not just about your capabilities or your commitment to the company. Wrong about who you are as a person. I saw you as insignificant because that was easier than seeing you clearly. And I'm sorry for that. Not sorry we're here now. This has been good for the company, and I can admit that. But sorry for how I treated you before. You deserved better." I wasn't sure what to say. I'd imagined a lot of scenarios for how the situation might evolve. Richard's anger, his resistance, his attempts to undermine me. What I hadn't fully imagined was this: his genuine attempt at accountability. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot." "Does it? Really? Or are you just saying that because it's the diplomatic thing to say?" Really, I didn't do this to make you apologize or grovel. I did it because it needed doing. But hearing you acknowledge what happened between us, that you see it differently now, yes, that means a lot. He nodded, satisfied. Good, because I'm trying to be the kind of person who can admit when he's wrong. It's harder than I expected, but then most worthwhile things are. He disappeared into his office, leaving me standing in the hallway, processing a conversation I'd never anticipated having. My phone buzzed. Lauren, can you get away for lunch? I'm nearby and I want to hear about the COO candidate. Absolutely. 20 minutes? Perfect. Meet you at that Thai place you like. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the elevator. As I waited for it to arrive, I looked around at the sixth floor, the executive level with its polished surfaces and quiet confidence. A year ago, I'd been invisible on the third floor, eating lunch alone, watching the company operate without registering my existence. Now I was here, visible, accountable, responsible for decisions that affected hundreds of people. It didn't feel triumphant exactly, it felt like work. Important work, but work nonetheless. The kind that required showing up every day and trying to do it better than you did yesterday. The elevator arrived. I stepped in, watching the floor numbers descend. Lauren was already seated when I arrived, scrolling through her phone with a glass of iced tea in front of her. She looked up as I approached and smiled. Real smile, not the cautious version she'd been wearing for months. Hey, she said as I sat down. You look tired. COO interviews. They're exhausting even when they're going well. But they are going well? You found someone? We think so. Patricia Holloway, former COO at 3 different tech companies, experience in organizational transformation, excellent references. We're making an offer. That's great. The company needs someone like that. She paused. Dad seems happier lately. More engaged. Did something happen? I told her about our conversation in the hallway. She listened carefully, her expression shifting from surprise to something more complicated. He apologized to you, she said. My father, who never apologizes to anyone and apologized to you. Seems like it. No, she shook her head. I don't know what that is. Growth, character development, some kind of Christmas miracle, except it's February. Maybe all of the above. She laughed, and the sound made something in my chest unclench. These past 3 months had been hard on our marriage. Not catastrophically hard, we'd both been committed to working through it, but hard in the daily, grinding way that tests whether you actually meant your vows. She'd come home after a week, but there had been distance, hurt that needed processing, trust that needed rebuilding. We'd gone to couples therapy, her idea, which I'd immediately supported, and spent 8 sessions excavating the implications of my secrecy, why I'd kept it from her, what it said about my trust in her, and how it made her question what else I might be hiding. Those sessions had been brutal, but useful. By session 5, we'd gotten to something real. I'd been so focused on protecting her from having to choose between me and her father that I'd never considered whether that choice was mine to make. I'd decided unilaterally that keeping her in the dark was better than trusting her with the truth. And that, our therapist had noted, was its own kind of disrespect. Lauren had cried during that session. So had I. But it had cracked something open. Let us start rebuilding on honesty rather than my paternalistic idea of protection. I've been thinking, Lauren said now, setting down her menu, about the company, about my role there. Okay, I don't want to be the CEO's daughter anymore, or the majority shareholder's wife. I want to be Lauren Hartwell, who works in marketing because she's good at it, not because of who her family is. You are good at it. I know, but people don't see that. They see the connections. And it's only going to get weirder now that you're on the board and everyone knows about your ownership stake. I'm tired of being defined by relationships to powerful men. What are you thinking? I'm thinking of leaving Convergence. Not immediately. I want to finish the product launch I'm working on. But after that, I want to find something else. Build my own career somewhere that has nothing to do with either of you. It hurt hearing that. Not because I wanted her tethered to the company, but because it was evidence of damage done. The ways my choices had complicated her life, limited her options, made her feel like she had to leave to be seen as herself. I think that's smart, I said. And I'll support whatever you decide. But Lauren, for what it's worth, everyone I've talked to in marketing thinks you're excellent at your job. That's not nepotism. That's you being good at what you do. Maybe, but I need to prove it to myself somewhere else. Somewhere that when I succeed, I know it's because of me and not because of who I'm connected to. She reached across the table and took my hand. This isn't about being angry at you anymore. I'm mostly past that. This is about figuring out who I am outside of these complicated family dynamics. I get it. Do you, really? I think so. You've spent 3 years watching me be invisible because I didn't want to be defined by visible power, and you want something similar, to be seen for your actual capabilities, not for your relationships. It's the same impulse, just inverted. She squeezed my hand. When did you get so good at articulating emotional stuff? Therapy. Our therapist is terrifyingly insightful. She really is, Lauren smiled. I'm glad we're doing that. The therapy, even when it's hard. Me too. We ordered lunch and spent the next hour talking about everything except work. Her book club had just finished a novel about family secrets that hit a little too close to home. My attempt to learn guitar, a resolution I'd made in January, was going poorly. We needed to plan a vacation, somewhere neither of us had been, somewhere that had nothing to do with business or family obligations. It felt normal, like we were just two people who loved each other, having lunch, making plans. The simplicity of it was almost shocking after months of weighted conversations and careful navigation of hurt feelings. As we were finishing, Lauren's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. Mom wants to know if we're coming to dinner Sunday. I told her we were. Your dad invited me earlier. I know, he texted me after. He wanted to make sure I was okay with it. Are you? Yeah, actually, I am. It's weird, but I think we're all figuring out how to be a family in this new configuration. It's not the old normal, but maybe it's a better normal, more honest. More honest, but more complicated. Most good things are both. She stood up, gathering her bag. I need to get back. Client meeting at 2, but Daniel? Yeah? I'm proud of you for how you've handled all this. The company, my father, the SEC thing. Ush, you could have been arrogant or power-hungry or vindictive. You weren't any of those things. You were just steady, even when it was hard. I'm just trying to do the right thing. I know, that's why I'm proud. She kissed me briefly. See you tonight. I'll pick up dinner on my way home. I watched her leave, then sat for a few more minutes, finishing my tea. The restaurant was half full with other people having normal Thursday lunches, living lives that didn't involve hostile board meetings or SEC investigations or conversations about corporate governance. I didn't envy them anymore. I had for a while, during the worst of it, but not now. Whatever complications came with visibility, whatever responsibilities came with power, I was learning to carry them. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with intention, with accountability, with a genuine commitment to being worthy of the authority I'd accumulated. My phone buzzed. Margaret Chen. Patricia accepted the offer. She starts March 15th. This is good news. I typed back, excellent. Let's prep her onboarding. Want her integrated fast. Agreed. See you at Monday's committee meeting. I paid the check and headed back to the office, to the 6th floor, to the work that was never quite finished, but was always meaningful. The invisible man was gone, dead and buried somewhere in those 3 months of transformation. In his place was someone messier, more complicated, more vulnerable to judgment and criticism and failure, but also someone more real, more present, more fully himself. I'd spent 6 years hiding in plain sight, accumulating power in secret, waiting for the right moment to reveal what I'd been building. The revelation had been dramatic. The board meeting had been tense. The announcement had sent shockwaves through the company. But the real work, the actual transformation, happened in the days and weeks and months that followed, in difficult conversations with Richard, in therapy sessions with Lauren, in town halls where employees challenged my decisions, in the slow, unglamorous work of proving through consistent action that I meant what I said about accountability and transparency and building something sustainable. That work wasn't finished. It would never be finished, really. There would be new challenges, new conflicts, new tests of whether we could actually sustain this complicated partnership we'd built. But for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't facing those challenges alone, from the shadows, pretending to be less than I was. I was facing them in the light, with partners, with accountability, with all the messy reality that visibility entailed. And somehow, despite everything, that felt like exactly where I was supposed to be.